Do we live inside a matrix? In other words, is the reality we perceive really what it seems to be? Does the brain show us reality as it truly is independently of whether it is being observed by an intelligent being? Or is what we perceive in fact an edited version constructed by our brain, based on how it interprets what is captured by our senses? Another way of putting this question is, does objective reality exist, that is, reality in itself? Or is what we call reality deep down a subjective construction of each one of us? This is the subject of another episode of Mystery or Fantasy. Come with us. What if everything you see, everything you touch, everything you love, everything you fear, and everything you call reality were not exactly the real world? What if the colors you see were not actually in the things themselves, but were an experience created inside your mind? What if sound were not in the world as you imagine it, but were only the way your brain translates vibrations transmitted through the air? What if what you call that intimate feeling of being someone, were also a construction? A narrative organized by the brain to give continuity to your life, your memories, and your desires. What if the reality you live every day were not a lie, but also not exactly what it seems to be? Today's question sounds like science fiction. Do we live inside a matrix? But perhaps the deeper question is another one. Does the brain show us reality raw and unfiltered as it truly is independently of our existence? Or is what we see, feel, and know merely a useful version of that reality, one that exists only inside us? A very warm welcome to Mystery or Fantasy, where great enigmas are explored with critical thinking, honest curiosity, and respect for the unexplained. And of course, respect for your intelligence too. Come with us and find out, is it mystery or fantasy? Our journey into the unexplained begins now. In today's episode, we're going to explore one of the most fascinating questions in contemporary culture. But we're not going to stay only with the movie version, with machines dominating humanity through cables that control everything. Today, we're going to try to go a little further. We're going to talk about philosophy, neuroscience, the psychology of perception, consciousness, digital simulations, and brains reconstructed inside computers. Neurons playing video games, and above all, the strange possibility that the first Matrix may not be outside us, but inside our own brain. When the first film in the Matrix trilogy was released in 1999, it left a deep mark on the collective imagination. The idea was powerful. What if all of humanity were living inside a simulated reality? What if people lived without knowing that everything was just a simulation produced by machines? The image became engraved in popular culture. Human beings trapped outside consciousness, while the mind lives an apparently normal life inside an artificial system. But Matrix did not invent this question. The film simply translated into the language of science fiction a much older doubt. What if the world we perceive is not the ultimate reality? This question has crossed philosophy, religion, science, and spirituality for thousands of years. Long before computers in the 4th century BC, Plato had already imagined human beings trapped inside a cave, mistaking shadows projected on the wall for true reality. Many centuries later, in 1641, René Descartes asked whether we might be being deceived by some evil genius, capable of producing within us all the perceptions we call the world. Later, Hilary Putnam developed the brain in a vat hypothesis. In his book Reason, Truth, and History, Putnam proposed a scenario in which a scientist would keep a brain alive inside a tank, receiving electrical stimuli from a computer that perfectly simulates reality. And today, in an age of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, immersive video games, and digital environments, the question has taken on a new form. What if we are living in a simulation? When someone asks whether we live inside a matrix, the first image that comes to mind is technological: computers, code, superior civilizations. But this is only one possible meaning of that same question. Because there is a simple but unsettling fact: we do not have direct access to the world. Our access to the world is limited to what we can absorb through our senses. We see only a small portion of the light spectrum. We hear only a narrow range of frequencies. We feel pressure, temperature, pain, smell, taste, balance. And that is only when we can actually detect something, because there are things that lie beyond our imperfect senses. Smells and sounds that only wolves and dogs can perceive. Objects that only the sharp eyesight of cats and birds of prey can detect. And when our human senses are able to capture any given stimulus, our brain organizes those signals into an experience called reality. So what we call reality is only a reading, an interpretation we try to make through imprecise lenses. The color red, for example, is not entirely in the object. What we see is an interaction between light, surface, retina, optic nerve, and brain. The experience of red happens inside us. And no one can guarantee that the red my brain sees is the same thing you know as red. Here it is worth opening a parenthesis to talk about this very interesting question, which is part of the concept known as qualia. Although two people may agree that the sky is blue, the sensation of color each one experiences may be completely different. Qualia is the term for subjective, conscious experiences, such as the smell of coffee or the redness of red. The inverted spectrum problem suggests that someone could see red where you see blue, and vice versa without us ever knowing. A philosopher, John Locke, in the 17th century, distinguished primary qualities located in the object being perceived, such as shape and mass, from secondary qualities located in the mind that perceives them, such as color, sound, and taste. The German poet Goethe, who also devoted himself to botany, physics, and color theory, argued that color is not only a physical experience, but also a psychological one. David Chalmers addressed the hard problem of consciousness. The physical properties of objects are different from what is perceived through the brain's processing. There is no guarantee that one person's inner experience is identical to another's. But moving on, sound also does not exist exactly as we hear it. The brain transforms vibrations into music, voice, noise, or memory. Is the world real? Yes, but the way we experience it is constructed. So the first concept of matrix we arrive at is that it is the structure of human perception, not the prison created by machines that we see in the movies. Think about something simple. At this very moment, you have the impression that you are seeing the world in a continuous, stable, and complete way. But that is not exactly what is happening. Your eyes are moving all the time. You blink. You have blind spots. The image that reaches the retina is incomplete, inverted, and fragmented. Even so, your experience feels whole, because the brain fills in the gaps. It completes the information that did not arrive, selects, stabilizes, and interprets it. We do not simply see with our eyes, we see with our brain. And our brain is not a passive camera, it is more like an editor. It takes the incomplete signals it receives and uses them to construct a minimally understandable scene. That is why optical illusions work, and why we can see patterns where there is only chance. That is why memories can change over time, and why two people can go through the same situation and come away with different versions of it. Each one of us lives inside a partially constructed reality. Not because we are outside reality, but because the human mind works this way. It turns stimuli into meaning. We live inside a perceptual simulation created by our own nervous system, fed by fragments of reality captured by our senses. And that is impossible to avoid. One of the most interesting ideas in contemporary neuroscience is that the brain works as a kind of prediction machine. It does not simply wait for the world to happen. It anticipates those events. Based on past experiences, memory, and expectation, the brain tries to explain what is happening now, and to predict what will come next. Then it compares those predictions with the signals coming in through the senses. When the prediction works, reality feels fluid. When the prediction fails, we feel surprise, strangeness, fear, or curiosity. This idea appears in predictive processing. Andy Clark describes the brain as a system that tries to combine sensory signals with expectations. The neuroscientist Anil Seth popularized a provocative phrase: our perception would be a kind of controlled hallucination. The brain actively constructs conscious experience, and this construction is continuously corrected by sensory data. The brain is not just a window onto the world. It is a world builder, an evolutionary advantage for anticipating danger. If reality depends on predictions and interpretations, our everyday experience is not a photograph of reality. It is an interface. Perhaps it is not a complete version. It may be only the version our organism is able to sustain. Visual illusions are simple examples. When two lines of the same size appear different, or when a color seems to change depending on the background. The stimulus reaching our brain has not changed. What has changed is the interpretation we are making. The illusion proves that what we perceive is not a raw copy of reality, but a construction based on context and expectation. The brain does not ask, "What is this in front of me?" It asks, "What does this probably mean?" The human mind was not made to contemplate ultimate reality, but to survive, to act, choose, escape, and predict. When you see the trash bin icon on a computer, you know it is a useful representation of complex processes. Likewise, what we call the world may be an adaptive interface that shows us enough for us to act. However, there are moments when this interface fails. Who has never had a feeling of déjà vu or experienced an unlikely coincidence? Many people call this a glitch in the matrix. But intense experiences are not proof of an external simulation. Déjà vu and coincidences reveal how the mind works through memory processes and pattern detection. One thing is to say that reality seems strange. Another is to say that we live inside a computer program. Between one statement and the other, there is a huge gap, and that is exactly the leap we need to examine carefully. Now the question becomes even more interesting. If the reality we live in depends on the brain, could a brain be simulated? And if it could, would that simulation have experience, consciousness, suffering, memory, perhaps even an eye? We are still very far from simulating an entire human brain. But the answer seems to be yes. Some experiments and scientific projects are already approaching this question from the edges. An important example is the Blue Brain project from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, Switzerland. The goal of the project is to create biologically detailed digital reconstructions of brain circuits in rodents. In 2015, researchers presented a digital reconstruction of a microcircuit from the somatosensory cortex of a young rat. This model included about 31,000 neurons and approximately 40 million intrinsic synapses. In other words, they recreated connections between neurons with different morphological and electrical types of cells. Does that mean they created a mind? No. Does it mean there was consciousness inside the computer? Also, no. But it does mean something fascinating. We are learning to turn nervous tissue into a computational model. Little by little, brain circuits stop being merely biological matter observed under a microscope and also become systems that can be digitally reconstructed, tested, and simulated. And this raises a disturbing question. If one day we are able to simulate a brain with enough precision, at what point does a simulation stop being mere calculation and become experience? Another example became known as DishBrain. Australian researchers cultured human and mouse neurons in the laboratory. Then they connected those cells to an array of electrodes. Finally, they created a simplified digital environment in which the neurons could interact with a version of that old little game called Pong. The study, published in the journal Neuron in 2022, showed that networks of neurons in culture could adjust their activity in response to stimuli and feedback within a simulated environment. No, there was no tiny person inside the Petri dish playing video games. Those neurons did not understand Pong the way we do. But the experiment showed that living neural networks can couple themselves to a digital environment and functionally modify their patterns of activity. And that is extraordinary, because it forces us to think about the boundary between biology, information, and learning. When living neurons connect to an artificial environment, where does the brain end, and where does the machine begin? And if a biological system can learn inside a rudimentary digital environment, what would happen with much more complex systems? Another impressive advance comes from the study of connectomes. A connectome is a kind of map of the connections within a nervous system, just as the Human Genome Project offered a map of human genetic configuration. In 2024, researchers linked to the Flywire Consortium published the complete map of the brain of an adult fruit fly, with around 139,000 neurons and 50 million synaptic connections. This is a very important scientific milestone, but also a lesson in humility, because even when we have a complete map of connections, one question still remains. Is having a map of a brain the same as understanding a mind? Imagine that someone hands you the complete map of a city, every street, every intersection, every building, every pipe. You would have a lot of information. But would that be enough to know what it is like to live in that city? To know where people fall in love, where they suffer, where they feel afraid, where they keep their memories? Maybe the brain is similar. We can map neurons, measure electrical impulses, and reconstruct circuits. But even then, the most difficult question remains: how does the activity of matter become subjective experience? How do electrical impulses become pain? How do neural networks become longing? How do molecules and synapses produce the intimate feeling of being ourselves? This is the so-called problem of consciousness, and perhaps it is the true heart of the question about the matrix. Now we arrive at the computational version of the question. With the advance of computers, video games, virtual reality, and artificial intelligence, some philosophers began to consider an extreme hypothesis. What if a much more advanced civilization were capable of simulating entire universes? In that case, conscious beings inside that simulation could live, think, love, suffer, do science, create religions, write poems, and ask about the origin of the universe, without realizing that they are part of an artificial system. This is the so-called simulation hypothesis. The Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom published a famous article in 2003 called "Are You Living in a Computer Simulation?" In it, Bostrom proposed an argument not in the form of a dilemma, but of a trilemma. First, civilizations like ours probably do not reach a post-human stage. Second, post-human civilizations might have no interest in running many simulations of their ancestors. Third, these simulations are possible and numerous. Perhaps we are living inside one of them. It is a fascinating argument. But Bostrom did not prove that we are living in a simulation. He only showed that this hypothesis cannot simply be dismissed as foolish. The problem is that these premises are enormous. We would have to assume that consciousness can be simulated, that advanced civilizations would survive long enough to do this, that they would be interested in creating ancestral simulations, that those simulations would be numerous, and that we would not be able to tell the difference. In other words, the hypothesis is philosophically interesting, but it is not an established scientific conclusion. We have no evidence whatsoever that we live in a digital simulation. We have no proof that a superior civilization is running our universe as a computer program. We cannot point to a coincidence, a déjà vu, or a strange experience and say, here is the proof of the matrix. The simulation hypothesis occupies a curious zone. It is not simply absurd, but it is not a proven fact either. It is a provocation about the limits of what we can know. If the brain constructs experience, if we do not see reality as it is in itself, then is reality an illusion? Not necessarily. A construction is not the same thing as a lie. When you see a table, perhaps you are not seeing its ultimate physical reality. Atoms, particles, fields, forces, empty spaces. But you are seeing a useful version of the table, a version that allows you to place objects on it, to sit around it, to recognize it, to name it, to use it. Human perception does not necessarily need to show ultimate reality. It needs to show a functional reality, a reality sufficient for living. The computer screen does not show all the internal circuits. It shows icons like the trash bin, pop-ups, images, useful representations. Perhaps consciousness works in a similar way. It offers us a habitable world, a world of colors, sounds, faces, stories, affections, threats, and promises. But perhaps behind this lived world, there is a reality far more complex than we are able to perceive. And that is why the question of whether we live inside a matrix fascinates us so much. Because reality may very well be greater than it appears. But there is still a third way of thinking about the matrix. Perhaps the matrix is not concrete or biological, as if what our mind experiences were a kind of dream while our real bodies remained outside. Perhaps the matrix is not merely a digital simulation. But, in a philosophical sense, perhaps the matrix is everything that makes us live alienated from what is really happening. The social values and beliefs about power and influence that we never question. An idea of happiness that is inaccessible to many, yet still kept as a life goal. The narratives we believe in society, in customs, and in politics. The algorithms that choose for us how we are going to spend our time. Social media, which edits reality and make us believe that everyone is happier, more beautiful, richer, and more fulfilled than we are. Dictating how we should behave, what we should consume, and what we should desire. The traumas that make the past feel like the present. The ideologies that organize our perception before we can even think for ourselves. In this sense, many people do effectively live inside a matrix. Not because they are connected to a machine, but because they behave as if they belong to a mold, to an army of clones. Because they confuse conditioning with freedom of thought. They confuse repetition with truth. They confuse induced desire with their own free will, appearance with reality. And waking up to reality may not mean discovering cables connected to your own body, but perceiving the filters through which we interact with the world. Or asking, why do I think the way I think? Why do I desire what I desire? Why am I afraid of what I am afraid of? Who wrote the stories I tell about myself? And which of them still deserve to rule my life? There is an even deeper question. Even if we were living in a simulation, would that make life less important? No, lived experience is real for the one who lives it. Therefore, even if we were inside a simulation, the pain we feel would be a real experience for us. Love would transform us just as much. Fear would paralyze us in the same way, and hope would sustain us just as deeply. And even if we are not certain which reality we live in, we should always ask ourselves how we ought to live within the reality we have been given. Whatever it may be, we can choose how to act, how to treat others, how to cultivate awareness, and how not to live only on autopilot. We may ask ourselves whether the reality we live in is real. But the question, what do I do with the reality I live in, is much more urgent and much more relevant. So, after all, do we live inside a matrix? Our final verdict is divided into two parts, if the question is literal. If we are talking about a digital simulation controlled by machines, aliens, or a superior civilization, the most sensible answer is that there is absolutely no evidence for this, however remote. It is a fascinating philosophical hypothesis, but so far, it remains merely fictional and speculative, making the literal matrix still closer to fantasy than to any other possibility. But if the question is deeper, if we are asking whether what we call reality is filtered, edited, predicted, and constructed by the mind, then the answer changes. That is when we enter the territory of mystery. Because we do not simply live in the world. We live in a human version of the world, a version constructed by limited senses, the brain, the body, memory, emotions, language, culture, and expectations. This does not mean that everything is false. It means that reality is more complex than our everyday experience suggests. In this sense, reality remains a mystery. Fantasy would be to claim, without any grounding, that we are prisoners of a cosmic computer. The mystery is to realize that, even awake, we may never be able to see reality whole as it truly is. If this video has made you look at this question in a different way, leave us your comment. For you, are we dealing with a mystery, a fantasy, or a question that still deserves to be asked? Leave your comment. Let's discuss our ideas. And your suggestions for topics for future videos will be very welcome too. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you'll be notified whenever a new video is released. Bye for now. We'll see you in the next episode of Mystery or Fantasy.